if you're ready.
Yeah.
Cool. Lucy, welcome to the Limitless Athlete podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
My absolute pleasure. And I know we kind of want to pull out some useful information about your background, but I don't want to drag you through the whole thing. So let's start off with a slightly more, I think, interesting question. Who were your role models when you were growing up?
I had a feeling you were going to ask this. So when I was doing gymnastics, it was like always Beth Twiddle, because she was like the one kind of GB gymnast at the time that was really performing on like the world stage. But also when you look at the kind of like the generation of gymnasts that were around at that time, like Russia was the really dominant force when I was doing gymnastics. And like the Russian gymnasts were your stereotypical, like lengthy, like long limbs, really elegant looking. And Beth Twiddle was like this powerhouse, like she was muscly. She was much more like the gymnasts that we're seeing now, like Simone Biles, who are like kind of not better built, but like they're more muscular, clearly very, very powerful athletes. And so I always really kind of admired her, not just from the performance side of things, but also because she just looked that little bit different. And then my family used to go to, like, we went to a couple of the Olympics. We were quite lucky, like went to Athens to watch, went to Beijing to watch, and then obviously London, we got tickets for that. And my sisters were both rowers, and so Catherine Granger was part of the women's, can't remember whether it was a 4 or quad, but it was that story of like, she got 3 Olympic silver medals and she was constantly chasing that gold medal. And so she was like, I really admired that. I admired her for sticking around kind of until she eventually got that. So yeah, I think those were the 2 key like sports people that I really admired. But then obviously, you learn masses from your family, my parents, my sisters. But in terms of sports people, it was definitely those 2.
So your family, did you say your sisters were rowers? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were kind of, we did a lot of sports growing up, but yeah, they kind of both settled on rowing.
Okay. So I'm going to guess a fairly athletic background or family structure.
Yeah, we were just always encouraged to like do sport. So, I was doing gymnastics for, I can't even remember starting gymnastics. It was like that much part of my childhood. And we also lived by the river. My parents lived by the river. So we got into swimming really young because they wanted us to be safe if anything happened. So that was how we kind of all got into swimming. And the gymnastics club that we were at was literally like the next road along. So we like went there. But yeah, we were definitely like encouraged to be active.
And what kind of lessons did your parents give you? Like, obviously, they kind of you got the swimming lesson there from a safety perspective, but like, what did they teach you about competing, about sport when you were growing up?
Oh, I mean, that's an interesting one. To be honest, I don't remember them like, they very much let us lead. So I never really got like dragged to training sessions necessarily, or anything like that. Like, I competed because I wanted to compete. I trained that much because I wanted to train that much. That being said, like my dad was a high-level judo player, so he was like Scottish national champion when he was younger, and spent a long time kind of, in that judo scene. And so yeah, it's a bit of a funny one because like, in terms of like me and my siblings, we weren't necessarily we definitely weren't encouraged to be like competitive with each other. But me being the youngest was always quite like competitive with them, whether or not they knew it. Like I wanted to do things that they'd not done, and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a bit of a funny one, because I wouldn't say that they didn't push us into anything. They encouraged us to do whatever we enjoyed, and that was about it.
Do you remember any? Because I'm going to link this in, because you did a master's in sports psychology, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so like gymnastics is notoriously a kind of a head game event and sport. Like it's you've got a lot kind of wrapped up, because well, you've got the kind of the judgment of aesthetics in there, so that's an interesting one anyway. And then you have the fact that it's just you, which is quite difficult, and but good prep for CrossFit. And then you have the kind of the various different coaching styles that come into gymnastics as well. Where did the interest in sports psychology really start?
I actually think that it was when I moved from. So the thing that got me interested in sports psychology was I was really interested in group dynamics, and like the effect of group dynamics on performance and performance environments and all that sort of thing. And so for me, it was actually moving from Winter Swimming Club, where I'd been a part of since I was learning to swim. I went through their Learn to Swim program, was there until I was 18, then went to Loughborough Uni. And then that change from being, the big fish in a small pond, to then being a small fish in a big pond with a lot of international athletes and very good athletes. And that was the thing that kind of started getting me interested in it. But also, I always found it really interesting how this is going to sound really strange, but how people interacted with you when you started to become successful, were potentially beating them and all that sort of thing. So like, for instance, we used to have these at Loughborough, we used to have like target times for different sessions. So if you were a female doing freestyle in this set, your target times were this. If you're a male doing freestyle in this set, then your target times were this. I would sometimes go faster than the target times because I was a freestyler and I didn't feel that they were hard enough for me. I also know that I was always someone that trained really, really hard. So like my training splits were quite often like the times that I should be going based off my training splits were much faster than what I was actually competing at. And sometimes the boys really hated that. They really didn't like the fact that I was like keeping up with them in training or anything like that. And I found that really interesting. And then also, like when I was at Windsor, other swimmers' parents and the way that they would interact with you as an athlete, like I was, anywhere between kind of 14, when I started to sort of make my way on the swimming scene, I guess it was like 14 onwards. And the way that they would interact started to change. And that I also found quite interesting because it just got me thinking about like, what is it about what I'm doing that is clearly triggering something in you to treat me differently, even though it has no effect on them. Like that was the thing that like I started to get really interested in just because it was affecting me so much.
How so? How is it affecting you?
No one wants to be, the odd one out when they're 14, 15. No one wants to be kind of have the kind of remarks about me that was made when I was that age. And it was that kind of, these were my friends' parents that were saying stuff about a 14, 15-year-old, like, it's just, you know, stay in your lane. Your child is doing however they're doing. Me, you know, winning a national medal or whatever, it's not making their achievements any less so. It was just a very strange kind of environment.
If you want to skip the question, absolutely fine, and we can kind of cut it out or just move on. What kind of stuff were they saying?
So I remember there was me and this one other girl, similar age. She was a IM swimmer, so individual medley for anyone that doesn't know. So she did like all of the events, or all of the strokes even. I was mainly freestyle, but also did a bit of backstroke and sometimes did medley just because of the fitness perspective. And we were at counties, and at counties you kind of do a lot of events because it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if you're at a certain level, it's not a huge deal, and it's just a kind of stepping stone on the way to nationals and that kind of thing. So my coach had chosen to pull me out of the 200 IM final, because it just wasn't an important event for me, and I'd already done loads that day, and the 100 free final was straight after the 200 IM final, and I was in the 100 free final, as was this other girl, but she, being an IM swimmer, also did the 200 IM, and I ended up beating her in the 100 free final, and her mum had a go at my coach, our coach, but with me literally stood right there, basically being like, you pulled Lucy out so that she would win the 100 free, saying all this sort of stuff. I got accused of favoritism quite a lot. Well, no, my coach got accused of favoritism quite a lot because if I was selected for a GB event, they will select a coach to go with them. And so sometimes my coach got selected, so he would come away with me and the rest of the GB team. And so, yeah, the parents weren't happy about that. Even though from like a development perspective, obviously this would only benefit their child. But yeah, there was a lot of kind of that sort of stuff that went around. And actually, you know, the fact of the matter is that I did well in swimming because I was at every single session. And that is more than can be said for most of the children of the parents that were saying stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, you can't kind of argue attendance or anything like that. Like, it was just a very strange place sometimes.
It's that's obviously a tough experience when you're a child and you've got adults kind of criticizing the decisions that involve you, and that's obviously going to affect you, but in a way that must prepare you for what's happening now in your development and your growth within the CrossFit scene and your rise, because like, to do anything exceptional and to reach any good standards, you've got to be an outlier and you've got to stand out, and that kind of an inherent part of that is criticism. Do you feel like that's kind of helped you and prepared you for now?
In some ways, yes. I think I still do care what people say about me. I think it's difficult to, you know, I think it's difficult not to for anyone. But ultimately, I'm doing what I'm doing because I want to do it, not because I'm trying to impress anyone else, or, you know, ultimately, I'm trying not to care what other people think or what other people say. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. You know, you can't argue with results. And to be honest, like, I think that's the thing that I've had to get used to the most in the last, let's say, 6 months, where I essentially, especially since Wodapalooza, I think was my first kind of experience of it, where I had like people that don't know me commenting on me. And, you know, luckily so far, it's pretty much been all positive. So I've not had anything to worry about. But I think that's definitely one of the things that I'm going to have to find a way to deal with, because I'm well aware that at some points, you know, there's probably not going to be, it's not all going to be people singing my praises and that kind of thing. There's going to be some people that criticize, and actually, like, my main goal throughout all of this is to just make myself proud. As long as I'm proud of myself with what I've done, if that's, you know, effort, if that's results, if that's the way that I, you know, carry myself and whatever, like, that's, I'm the only person that I have to be accountable for and accountable to. So yeah, I think it's just like taking it back to why I do it and the kind of that selfish side of things.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? To kind of to pin your self-pride and self-love not on the results that you get, although that's something that you're interested in, but your actions and kind of and separating them from yourself. Like, how do you manage that?
Well, I just think that, like, the results that I get, that's, you know, when we talk about like process goals and outcome goals and that kind of thing, the results is the outcome goal. Like, a placing is an outcome goal. I only have control over, you know, what I do, and that's where the kind of basing my judgment and my performance on the things that I have control over. You know, did I make smart choices in the middle of the WOD? Did I follow my strategy? If my strategy didn't go right, if I wasn't, you know, doing what I wanted to do, did I take the initiative to change it? And then hopefully, if I'm, you know, tick off all those things and I'm like, yeah, I'm happy with that, happy with that, happy with that, then the outcome goal happens regardless. That's the hope anyway. Obviously, you know, sometimes that's not the case, in which case at least I can be happy with my performance, but you go back to the drawing board and be like, right, okay, so then what do I have to do? What do we have to change to make that outcome closer to what we want the outcome goal to be? But yeah, like, you just, it's that classic control the controllables. As long as I do what I set out to do, I have to be happy with that in some way at least.
Yeah, I'm guessing like you're speaking in a way that shows me you've done a lot of work here, and you've kind of either thought about this very deeply, had some like great influences on you. Obviously, doing a master's in sports psychology, you definitely kind of learn a fair amount of this. Who else teaches you about this? Where do you kind of develop yourself? Where do you learn about this from?
So it's one of the things that Red Pill do really, really well. So Phil and Cyril, so Phil's the owner of Red Pill, Cyril is my coach at Red Pill. We do a lot of stuff in that way. And to be honest, for me, it started around the quarterfinals last year. So the 21 quarterfinals, when I was getting a few more messages from like strangers, just like tagging me in stories, being like, "Oh, well done," because I, you know, finished top 100 in the Open, and that was the first kind of year that anything like that had happened. And I'd had more requests than normal to like come on podcasts, or people send me things or whatever, and I was starting to sort of see the route that this was coming down, and I felt like that was quite a lot of pressure for me at the time. And so I was talking to my coach about it, because it was just stressing me out quite a bit. I was like, I feel like people are expecting things from me, and there were absolutely no guarantees that I was, you know, going through to the semi-finals from the quarters that year. in fact, it was like a bit of a surprise to me that I got through to the semi-finals. And so that was kind of when we started working on these sorts of things. But I think as well, in the last sort of, let's say 3 months or so, I've started like journaling a bit more. So that for me has been really useful, because I think a lot about things. I spend a lot of time, on my own when I'm training, and that kind of thing. I live on my own as well, so I'm spending a lot of time in my head, and so actually just to be able to kind of write things down sometimes, I feel like that really helps. Like the first time that I kind of instinctively did it without being told, this was before I actually started journaling. It was before the Arnold Fitness Games last year, and I was feeling a lot of pressure going into that. Like I was really, really nervous. The WODs didn't necessarily suit me that well. There were some movements in there that I was really nervous about, some heavy weights in there that I was really nervous about. And I was putting pressure on myself to do really well there. And so the night before, I literally just like got out my training diary and wrote down everything that I was thinking. And I felt so much better after that. That was the thing that kind of made me think, okay, maybe I need to spend a little bit more time doing that kind of thing, just to kind of free up some headspace a little bit. So yeah, I like the guys at Red Pill, they know what they're doing with that sort of stuff, and they've been really, really helpful with my development in that way.
Nice. Yes, that's really cool to note that you're getting used to the journal. Like as athletes and as human beings, really, one of the things that characterizes someone that pushes hard and wants to develop is like the self-imposed pressure. And like the pressure can be a great thing, or it can be overwhelming. Yeah. And we don't really know what's happening if we don't get our thoughts out, either through like conversation with someone where we have to like verbalize it, or writing it down, where it becomes like this, like, I don't know, this thing that we can see. It's like it's an object, and we can kind of observe it and get some perspective on it. It also clears up a lot of the thoughts as well. It sounds like you're doing what we would probably refer to as like an observe your inner athlete. So like your inner athlete being your subconscious, just like, okay, right, I'm going to splurge it onto paper, see what's there, see what's going on. And that in itself like gets some of the stress out. But yeah, it's like, is that your kind of your main journaling strategy?
Yeah, probably. And sometimes it's like, sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes I don't write a lot. Sometimes I will write like pages on pages. And it's just like whatever I'm feeling at the time. But also there's something that Phil says to do, and I know that he's spoken about it on a few podcasts. It is like, I am a person that, and then you fill in the blanks. And it's just like a way of concisely kind of like getting to know yourself, or making sure that you know yourself, so that when a situation arises, you know what like your tendency is in that situation. So like what your 4-year-old thinks, or what your chimp, or whatever you want to call it, like what your gut reaction is in that situation, and actually like how to deal with that. So like for me, it's like, I'm a person that is a perfectionist. I expect myself to be, really on it all the time, especially when I'm training. Like, I expect myself to constantly be hitting numbers that are close to PBs, or whatever the case may be. And so I will really beat myself up when I don't do that, especially because for me, I know that my strength is something that I really need to improve on. And so I put even more pressure on myself for that, because I know that that's like my, target area. And so actually sometimes it's just like writing stuff out like that, and making myself be a little bit kinder to myself in those situations, because it's not realistic with the volume that we do, and with different phases or whatever, it's not realistic to be doing that all the time. It's not realistic to be PBing all the time, or, you know, hitting numbers that are 90% plus all the time or whatever. And actually sometimes like it takes me writing down my thoughts in that way that like, and sometimes it's savage. I'm savage to myself and I'm like beating myself up for not being good enough and whatever. Like sometimes it takes me actually reading that to be like, no, like this is your 4-year-old speaking, this is your chin, and you need to kind of control that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's really nice. We use the concept of bound nature, so as opposed to free nature, where you're free to perform in your best interest and you're free and open, and like that's the nature of all the greatest performances, you know, where you just feel light and open and you're not constricted in your mind. Then you have like the bound nature, and it's like the more awareness you have of that, the easier it is to deal with it, because it's like, oh, I've caught it before it becomes this huge kind of seismic event, and I can catch it a little bit earlier. So it's really cool that you have that perspective, and that you're kind of like, yeah, you're generating awareness of it. That's a great sign. Have you got any other like mindset, habits, practices that you engage in regularly? And that could be anything from like going for a walk frequently, disconnecting, seeing friends, family, to a meditation practice or like CBT or anything like
that. Honestly, like not that I can think of immediately. Like I know that one thing that I do, especially if I'm coaching and then going to straight into a training session or something like that, like I'll always go and get a coffee, and that like marks my start of me getting into my training headspace and me getting out of like coaching mode, because we've got like a coffee shop around the corner, so it's like 10 minutes away from the box just to kind of, you know, think about what I'm doing. But I think one of the things that I need to get better at in that sense is kind of like seeing family and friends a little bit more regularly. It is a little bit difficult because, so I'm in Nottingham. My parents live just outside London in Windsor. My sisters live in London. A lot of my uni friends and school friends live around London. So one of the challenges that I have quite a lot is like trying to keep that balance by going down to London and, you know, spending a weekend in London or whatever. It means usually potentially sacrificing a bit of training in that sense. And there will be certain times where I'm not willing to do that, and so I don't see them for months. So like, for instance, at the moment, like in the run-up with what, a month away from semis, it's really quite stressful if I'm thinking about spending a weekend away, because I have to think about managing that. That being said, I know that that kind of balance is something that helps me, especially in the long run. And I plan to like be doing this sport for a long time, so I know that I need to get better at that so that I can kind of manage the stresses and everything like that a little bit better. I mean, it's, you know, stereotypical. I spend a lot of time watching Netflix if I'm not training, if I'm not coaching, just because it's something that's easy, gets me out of like my own head. And that's the thing, I think, like, obviously I've said it already that I'm a massive overthinker, and I will, you know, easily sit and go through training videos and everything like that, like, and actually just something that can take me away from that. In lockdown, I got really into jigsaws, but at the moment, I just don't have the patience for it.
Yeah. You mentioned like the training hard piece as well. And it's like you said right at the beginning, like I am someone who trains hard and really pushes themselves, and like that. And you like I kind of scratched down a note that you put in one of your blog pieces, which I think was fantastic. So give me a moment whilst I try and read my own handwriting. But it was like something like, my identity is too volatile and dependent on my ability to train. My life is too closely linked with CrossFit. And like that solidification of identity is like, and there's a very vulnerable and beautiful like blog post, by the way, and it's really important, and it's something that more people need to be aware of, I think. But like that solidification of like my identity as an athlete, like this is who I am, is really useful in some ways, because it provides that kind of like that heuristic, that simple choice for you of in X scenario, do A rather than B. Like it's like when I'm presented with seeing my family or getting in the most essential training session for my future, it becomes a little bit easier to make that right decision, because it's like, this is who I am. But like that really rigid identity as well can also cause havoc when it's like, I'm somebody who trains really hard, but what if I'm injured? Or what if actually I haven't seen my family in fucking ages, and now I'm really starting to miss them, and it's affecting my training quality. And it's like that kind of fixed rigidity, like is a tough one. I suppose my question here is something like, how do you focus on training enough and make sure it's really the primary focus in your life, whilst maintaining that flexibility and that ability to adapt, and that kind of softness of identity too?
It's a bit of a funny one, because so I wrote that article when I was injured, and that was what kind of made me realize so clearly that like I was questioning everything at that point. I think I hadn't been training properly for a good kind of 3 or 4 months. And naturally that phase was kind of what got me started on Red Pill. I would also say that I probably haven't done enough to change that at this point in time. I kind of have really lent into the athlete identity, and it is a really difficult one to kind of manage, because like you say, in some ways it makes things really quite black and white. Like I know what I need to do to get where I want to get to, and being so closely aligned with that identity helps me with that. That being said, the thing that's made it so hard is the fact that because I've started doing well, all of these kind of opportunities have come around that. So like sponsorship deals and that kind of thing. And actually at the time that I was that I wrote that, I don't think it was long until I kind of signed up for a performance lifestyle advisor course, one of the TAS ones, and my aim was to kind of potentially start exploring that avenue whilst I was doing CrossFit. Realistically though, at this point in time, I do not have the time for that. And because I was thinking, you know, what do I do after CrossFit? Like what happens after CrossFit? And I think at the moment what I'm sort of kind of battling with is trying to think about what happens after CrossFit, whilst also actually just trying to enjoy CrossFit, because I'm 25, I know this isn't going to happen forever, and actually I also know that if I don't lean into it now, I could not go where I could get to, if that makes sense. Like I could end up not maximizing my potential in this way, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to kind of sacrifice this just in case I don't, you know, I don't know if I'm willing to kind of put this side of things on hold, because there's other things outside of CrossFit that I want to explore at the moment. And I think actually it's, in terms of managing it, like it kind of depends on the time in the season as well. So like at the moment I am, you know, knee deep in the season. I know that I have to be that full-on hard athlete identity right now. But when the season is over, when I get to wherever I get to in the season, actually I know that I also need that more balance, and I need to come away from that a little bit more. And I think that's kind of how I'm going to have to manage it at this point in time, rather than kind of constantly separating myself from that identity. So yeah, I mean, I haven't changed it all that much at this point, to be honest, but I think that's definitely like, there's a time and a place for me to really lean into it. And right now is definitely that time.
Well, you're figuring out what's working for you, right? Like it sounds to me as someone who coaches mindset and has coached mindset and like spoken to a lot of athletes over my time, that you're figuring out the seasonality thing of like, you've got to have some yin to your yang, and like that kind of yang energy of like, okay, force, structure, rigidity, like this is who I am, no compromises. It's essential, but only if it's balanced out with that yin side of things too, the soft, relaxed, kind of gentle. And like, you have it not only in like seasons of competing, like say, okay, I'm going to have some time off and explore other things, but also you have it in like eras of your life too. And it's like, trust me, you'll figure out when you get to that next stage of your life, like you'll figure it out, and just rinse this for what it's worth. Like take it, absorb every moment. Like you're only going to get the opportunity once, you might as well go full in on it. It's I think that's now will open up more opportunities as you go forwards as well, and give you more options.
So that's the thing. I think as well, when I was swimming, like I was very aware that a swimming career would have an end to it. So like whilst I was swimming, I was very much like, I need to make sure that I get good grades. I need to make sure that I go to a good uni and that kind of thing. And like that meant that, I mean, very rarely did I miss the opportunity to go on like a training camp or anything like that. But there was one that I missed that was in the run up to like my A levels or something like that. And I actually think in hindsight, I probably should have gone to it, because I don't think it would have affected anything else. But I was so stressed about A levels because they were this massive thing, and you know, they dictate whether or not you go to uni. Whereas now I'm just a bit like, oh, just do it.
Yeah, that the rigidity piece as well, like all the kind of like, who am I in this moment, and what do I need to do, and like the kind of the structure of identity. It gets harder the more people are reinforcing that too. And you're at this time, and like people see it as well when they transition, whatever level of fitness they are, when they transition from like an unhealthy lifestyle to a slightly more healthy lifestyle, and they start training, and everyone else around them is like, whoa, this person's going to the gym like 3 times a week, or this changes the nutrition, or they reach an elite standard and they start to get more eyeballs on them. Like the more people that kind of reinforce this identity, the harder it is to kind of step back from that and see yourself with a bit more perspective, and not become what other people say you are, and instead just be who you actually are. And that's super tough. Like you must, it's the same conversation we had before of like separating yourself from your thoughts and emotions and what you're thinking.
Yeah. And I think at the moment, like I'd quite like, I think, to be fair, based off the blog that I wrote, which I'd quite like to kind of keep going. I write when I want to write, and not when I feel pressure to write or anything like that. You know, people have asked me kind of questions that skirt around just CrossFit. So like, you know, talking about body image or things like that. Talking potentially about like women in sport. But then also like the sports psychology side of things as well. I think those are the things that kind of, for me as an athlete, they are areas of interest that don't just lie in CrossFit. And I think that's the thing that helps me sometimes to kind of at least feel a little bit broader in that sense. That it's not just CrossFit that I care about, that there's like other parts to that as well, that may or may not link with CrossFit, but they can, you know, they go across sports. So the
first thing, like you mentioned 2 things there that I really want to make sure we explore today, and the kind of the first one I think is around body image, because like you even spoke about your, I'm forgetting your the kind of the role model in gymnastics that you mentioned right at the beginning. Beth Twiddle. She said, like you said, that she was had slightly different figure and slightly different aesthetic to everyone else, Why was that something that captured your attention?
You know what? I don't actually, I don't think I realised it at the time. I don't think I realised that was why at the time that I kind of, looked up to her. I think part of it is potentially because I never really felt like I looked like the other girls at gymnastics. Whether or not I did, and that was just a perception that I held, is one thing. But I definitely didn't feel like I looked the part when I was swimming, let's say. There was, there was quite a few comments made at certain points during my swimming career, but I do remember the first one being when I was like 13, which is just far too young to be making comments on anyone's physique. But also, like, at the time, I'd just been to South Africa on a student exchange for 2 weeks, had no control over what I was eating. My training had obviously dropped. And I remember coming back and my coach making a comment about the fact that I put on weight. And it's like, oh, well, yeah. Now I look back at it and I'm like, no shit, of course I put on weight. Like, I was eating differently and I couldn't train at least 2 hours a day like I normally would. Like, had I just gone back to eating normal, like what my mum would eat, what my mum would cook, and training normally, the weight that I put on would have literally just dropped off, because I was at that age where, like, it's a bit more linear than it is now, in terms of that relationship between, what goes in and what goes out. But because the comment was made, it just started these like thoughts, and I was like, oh God, like, I'm fat, I'm not going to swim as well because I'm fat. And I think, unfortunately, when you're in a sport where you're not wearing anything, there is nowhere to hide. So yeah, I mean, I honestly can't even remember the question, but that was this kind of the start of some very interesting a very interesting relationship with my body and that kind of thing. Yeah.
It's like, the reason I'm so interested is, like, obviously it's a topic within CrossFit that affects so many people. And like, I've been there as well, whereas like when I was coaching a specialist, like, hey, I'm an ectomorph and I'm skinny, and like this is kind of my default setting. Like, I'm not jacked like all the dudes here, and they feel like a kind of, I always felt like an outsider and felt like, oh, my worth is based on like how I look, and like, especially trying to build a coaching career as well. And it's like, oh man, it's like, I feel like I'm judging myself based on what other people used to say, and that's creating some sort of barrier. And like, I'm guessing, like, I haven't been to your level of fitness and like kind of competing at your standard, but I'm guessing that stuff doesn't just go away because you're a Wadapalooza or you're going to semis.
No, definitely not. And like, I think it is an interesting one that, like, I'm definitely getting better at letting my performance be the thing that dictates kind of how I feel about things. But I also still don't feel like I look like most of the rest of the girls that I'm in a heat with. Like, my abs are sometimes visible, but they're not visible all the time. And I'm like, stood next to girls that are fully jacked and like, lean as hell. And especially in the swim event, the road swim run, like, we were just stood queuing in our bikinis, and I was like, oh God, it honestly is probably almost my idea of hell, or was at the time at least. Like sitting on a rower, I wore my shorts on the rower because I didn't feel like I would be comfortable rowing in just a bikini. And the thought of running in a bikini in front of, like, right in front of the stage, with a camera potentially, which it did end up being, like right on me, because I knew that that would be a good event for me. Whether or not, you know, I'd win it, I didn't know, but I knew that I would be up there. That was pretty scary. That being said, my finish line photo is now one of my absolute favourite photos, because we've actually got it up in the mez here. I just think it's so cool. I can't believe I did that. Like, that's a massive demon to kind of overcome from a personal sense. And I don't think it's 100% made me feel comfortable. Like, I don't know if I ever will, but it's definitely one of those like memories that I put in the bank to be like, you've done this before, you can do this. Like, what you look like doing it, no one cares. There were no comments about that. Like, it does not matter. I won that event, whether or not I look like the rest of the girls. That's the thing that matters to me. So yeah, it's definitely still something that I think about from time to time, but I think about it a bit less now, which is good.
Yeah, I think there's that. And by the way, thank you for sharing that. Like, there's so many people that are going to resonate with that. Like, so many people are going to hear that and go like, oh shit, that's me. Like, I feel like that way. And I feel like walking to the gym, I don't look like everyone else. And like going to this comp, I don't look the same way as everyone else. And I think we all do it to a degree, probably. Like, we all kind of feel like outsiders. And sometimes, and like, especially when you're rocking up to an event that's a very big event and you're kind of breaking onto the CrossFit scene, like it's tough to do. But it sounds like you're, again, approaching this in a really the best way that you can do, which is a progress over perfection thing. We think that there's this belief for some reason that we think, oh, we're just going to completely get rid of our body image issues and like kind of the self doubt and kind of lack of confidence there. Like, it's just going to completely disappear, but that's not really the case. We just progressively get a little bit better at dealing with it and kind of find out a system and kind of detach our identity from our looks entirely. So it's really cool you're doing that. It's awesome to see.
I think it's a funny thing as well, because, like, you know, I'm aware that, especially for like people in the box, that like I might be the person that they compare themselves to now, which, you know, is firstly very flattering in some ways, but also it's a little bit ironic that we all kind of feel like an outsider, feel like, you know, I think in some way everyone will feel like an outsider at some point. But that's the kind of nice thing, that like that's what then connects us, because actually everyone feels like an outsider, so no one is an outsider. But yeah, like I don't really like the thought of kind of being that point of comparison for people at my box, especially because there's things that everyone's insecure about, no matter what you look like. I think that is the thing that kind of we all need to remember. Like, everyone just has their insecurities, and, you know, for ages mine was like my legs, because that was the thing that for me was focused on in swimming, that like I was essentially told that my legs were too big. And now people are like, oh my god, I wish I had legs like yours. You're like your quads or whatever they might say. And like I might struggle to accept that still, but it's quite nice that that's the thing now, that like made me feel like the outsider in swimming, but now makes me feel, I don't know, normal in some way in CrossFit.
Definitely. It's I think for the most part the CrossFit communities does a pretty good job of incorporating people for the most part. Obviously there's always examples of it, but for like most people it's like fairly accepting, and that can only be a good thing. I suppose this links into the other point that I really want to touch on as well. Is like you said something like confidence is something you struggle with a lot, I think, in one of your posts, and like that could have been however long ago, and it was an Instagram caption that you wrote out and all that kind of stuff, but like where are you with confidence right now?
It's an interesting, it's still very much work in progress. I feel like for me at the moment, it's trying to believe that I belong where I am. So like my position on the leaderboard in the semis, I will give excuses as to why people didn't beat me. Certain people didn't beat me. And it's other people that have to tell me, like, no, you put in those performances. God, I'm actually weirdly shaking talking about this. I don't know whether it's like adrenaline or what, but yeah, I need to be like talked around to the fact that I deserve to be there, and then that's the thing that like gives me confidence. I really feel like at the moment it's quite a formative phase in that sense, because I'm starting to perform better at higher levels against athletes that like I used to watch on TV. It's taking a while for me to kind of accept that that's where I'm at, and like to believe that the places that I want to get to, or the place in particular at this point in time that I want to get to, that's like actually possible. So it's not, I'd say in some aspects I'm confident in some ways, but I really feel like at the moment this is like very much challenging how I feel when I kind of step out onto the water floor. I know that at Waterpalooza I was absolutely petrified. I was so nervous, but actually as the weekend went on I got more and more confident, not because like, I don't know, I think it was just the fact that actually like I was in those heats against those people, finishing in a good position, and like I said before, you can't argue with the results. Like that for me is something that's like, oh, I deserve to be here. And so it's a really funny one, but I feel like you'll understand this from a psychology perspective when we talk about like vicarious experience and that kind of thing, and that being a source of confidence. It's a little bit cringy and a little bit narcissistic in some ways, but if I'm really feeling not confident, I will watch some of the events at Waterpalooza to just be like, no, you did that, like that was you, you absolutely deserve to be here. And that for me is kind of a source of confidence, like remember, because sometimes it feels like that just didn't happen, and so I actually need to remember that like that happened and that was me doing that. So yeah, confidence TBC is coming, but yeah.
Hey, you're doing cool stuff about it. You're doing really cool stuff. Like when we get those moments where it's like, oh, I'm not great on confidence right now, like I'm feeling low, and like, or I'm feeling like I haven't got this, and I'm feeling that doubt knocking around, like you're just there's part of your brain looking around and just selecting all these pieces of evidence, like, oh, I'm shit because of A, I'm shit because of B, I'm shit because of C, like this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, haven't been doing this, I missed my like macros yesterday, whatever it is, it's like going to pull out all these key informations. And build up this case of evidence that really isn't true at all. But then you go back and you go, actually, I finished fourth at Wadapalooza. I won this event. I did these awesome things. I came from here to here. And like, part of the confidence piece is just going back over that frequently enough and really reminding the kind of that reptilian part of your brain, no, you know what, I do deserve to be here and I am good enough to be here. But it takes a while because your story's always changing, who you are is always changing, and hopefully you're always putting yourself in positions where maybe you're not quite deserving to be there. Maybe you're on that cusp of I deserve to be here. Maybe like you're breaking through, and like that's the perfect place to be at the end of the day.
Yeah, massively. And I think that's the other thing, that like, I know that I've always been someone that gets confidence from like work and training. And that was one of the things that like I always prided myself on when I was swimming, was the fact that I trained really hard. And the work that we're doing at the moment, the work that Red Pill does in general, like Red Pill has a bit of a reputation for being kind of high volume, hard work. And that really works for me in terms of where I get my confidence from. But like, it's one of the things that I like about keeping training diaries and that kind of thing, is that, you know, in the same way that Wadapalooza is, like me watching Wadapalooza is a way of reminding myself what I've done, looking back at like what I have, like weights that I've been lifting this year versus weights that I was lifting this time last year. Like I put 14 kilos on my 4 rep max back squat over the last, well, literally year. And I know that even though strength wise I'm not where I need to be or not where I want to be, I've massively improved from where I was last year. And pardon me, that is another thing that like I know gives me confidence. That work and that improvement gives me confidence. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the exact right tactic. It's exactly what we're looking to do. Just like look at that proof. What about, I suppose the challenge is when the inevitable happens, which is injury. And as an athlete, like that is, small injuries are inevitable, big injuries sometimes do happen. And like I remember speaking to Bethany Shadburn about this as well, like obviously in a very similar or kind of a very obvious situation with injury at the moment. Like when you hit those injury patches or you have those hard knocks, how do you pick yourself back up then?
Honestly, injury is probably one of my biggest fears at this point in time. So that's a hard one to answer because I feel like I definitely haven't had to deal with it with the last 2 years. As I said, it was the thing that took me onto Red Pill in the first place. I also think, to be fair, if I was to get injured, I'm in no better hands than being with Red Pill. Like they really know their stuff in that sense. I also think that we do so much in terms of prehab and that kind of thing that we are giving ourselves as good a chance as possible to not get injured. But I definitely found that when I was injured, so I think it was 2020, in fact it was nearly 2 years ago, like around this time. It was literally just about focusing on what I could do at the time, like, and trying not to think too much about, you know, what I was missing out on, what progressions I could be making at that time. It was more about like what can you do? So for me, it was like, I'll use this as a chance to improve my strict gymnastics because I wasn't very strong with body weight. And so although, massively, it was kind of a really disorienting time. I don't even know if that's how you say that word. I tried to kind of use it. I mean, it sounds really, typical, but use it as an opportunity to see what other gaps I could fill. So no, I wasn't necessarily going to be lifting super heavy weights, but if I could get my strict strength stronger, then my kipping would improve and that kind of thing. And so that was the thing, and I think that would be the thing that I would focus on if that time came, which hopefully it won't. Touch wood. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it. It's like, what's the controllable factors? What can I do? What can I positively do to keep myself moving forwards? And hopefully then you find your best opportunity and you kind of keep that element of momentum going. It feels like you're still creeping forwards and like, okay, what can I learn from it? What can I use from this moment? What are the opportunities that I wouldn't have got otherwise without this happening? If you can kind of find that piece, which is so hard to do, that kind of prepares you for it. And that's something you practice. Like, what's the quote around, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. If you're constantly practicing, like, okay, something bad's happened, or something not great has happened, how can I use it as an opportunity? If you're doing that for the small things every day, it becomes so much easier or so much less difficult to do it for the for those big things that inevitably do happen. So it sounds like some good prep going in there too. So we've covered your regular habits around journaling, which I think is, again, fantastic. Are there any books you've read or that you recommend for people, or any resources that you turn to for mindset? Obviously, Phil's one of them. Red Pill's one of them. Anything else that you recommend for people?
I really liked, I think it's called Legend or something, the book about the All Blacks. And I honestly can't remember. I read it a few years ago, but it was just about like their practices. Obviously, they are a notoriously good rugby team, but it was, for me at the time, I read it when I was doing my masters. It was really interesting from a group dynamics perspective, which, as I said, was kind of the thing that brought me into the sports psychology setting. And then it's not like a psychology or mindset one, but another one that I found really interesting was called Sports Gene, which was just about the role of genetics in sport performance. It's a little bit sciencey at times, like when they're talking about different segments of gene and whatever. But that again was really interesting. I'm trying to think of another one, but I can't remember its name, so I'm not gonna go down that road.
Was the book about the All Blacks legacy by
That's
James Kerr?
Yeah, cool.
I did a little bit of Googling. I didn't know it. Fantastic. That's really cool. I'll check those out for sure. So final question, Lucy, where can people find you? Where can people follow you? Where should they go to watch your progress?
Literally just Instagram at Lucy Campbell 5. Nowhere else fancy at the moment.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.